All right, thank you, Eric. As Eric said, my name is Seth Thoenen, spelled nothing like it sounds, if anybody's curious. It's all German, long story, we won't get into it today. I work for Jack Henry & Associates. We make bank software. We're not a law firm. A lot of people see that associates on there and think law firm, but no, we're in the fintech industry. So we make bank software, sell it to big banks, small banks, credit unions. So what that means is we're highly regulated. And we go through about 30 plus audit engagements a year. And these things do not take a few days. They're very extensive. So at any point in time, Jack Henry is under some type of audit. The JHA organization, we have multiple business units, which include dozens of Windows domains, hundreds of different products that we sell, thousands of systems, and we're unfortunately 98+% Windows. We're working on the Linux. We're growing in that area. Just a quick rule of thumb, JHA is basically a conglomerate of smaller businesses. I work for a group that's kind of corporate IT. We provide services and solutions for the various business units of Jack Henry. We've been using Chef for configuration management for just under a year, and previously we would use Chef just to bring in new systems into the fleet. So to take some advice from Mr. Sean Bean, one does not simply make audits suck less overnight. If it were as easy as buying Chef and like sliding into your rack in your data center and saying, we did the DevOps, we would have all done that by now, right? So it takes time. So that's like what Mr. Bean's advice for us here. So I'm going to tell a quick story. First, we're going to go through what JHA was like prior to Chef, and then we're going to talk about what JHA is like with Chef. So let's get started. So as stated earlier, we are a conglomerate of basically smaller business units. We have some that are large, some are small, and of various sizes in between. And to make matters a little more complicated, these business units will have multiple Windows domains. Some will have one giant domain. Some will have multiple different small domains. So we have big business units with lots of domains, small business units with multiple domains. And so we've got a wide variety of clients that we have to work with. So the tool set. For configuration management, on the Windows side, mostly SCCM and group policy, and then PowerShell scripting in there as well. For Linux, we really didn't have anything. We're still bringing that up, mostly bash scripting at that point. For compliance visibility, to see what our infrastructure looks like, we use Qualys, and those scans usually originate every 2 to 4 weeks, so there's quite a feedback loop delay there. And the downside with Qualys is it can impact system functionality, as it is sometimes can be a very aggressive scan. Somebody uses Qualys. On top of that, we have a lot of custom-built reports that basically aggregate information from various different repositories of data. That data usually gets refreshed every 24 to 48 hours, and it requires a human to actually update that report. So if I need something new added to this, I've got to go tug somebody on the shoulder and say, hey, go add this to my report, please, and eventually get added in. So, vulnerability remediation. What would happen is we would take Qualys or some other agent scanning tool and determine which systems in our fleet were vulnerable. What we do is we would take those systems, we would line them up, and we'd shotgun blast some fix out to them. But in doing that, we would have more systems that would drift in and out of compliance. So we'd go ahead and line those up and do it again, and just this infinite loop of things moving in and out of compliance. Basically, you're playing whack-a-mole with like servers that are like non-compliant over and over again. So what that kind of looks like in like a workflow diagram is Qualys define vulnerability, and then we have multiple different business units, and each business unit kind of likes to do business differently. So each business unit would kind of pick a different way to remediate these said vulnerabilities. So business unit A could use something like SCCM, another business unit could use something like group policy, and maybe business unit G is like, oh, we only got 5 servers that are vulnerable. We're just going to like patch that with PowerShell or something like that. The only thing that really leads to is configuration drift, right? But this isn't really a good, accurate representation of configuration drift. It looks a little bit more like this. Even though all these systems might be fixed, they all look completely different, and there's no standardization. Applying new standards, what we would do is work with our security governance team to implement and adopt these. What we would do is bring them into the build process, so as we bring in new systems into the fleet, they would adhere to the latest JHA configuration standards. The problem that we had, it was hard to determine which systems across the fleet had met these already and which ones didn't. And we didn't really have a good solution on how to bring the rest of the fleet up to speed. That's how we got Chef. So And that's just configuration drift right there. So what would happen, we would apply a new standard. Most of our stuff probably wouldn't adhere to that because it's a new thing. We'd bring in new systems, they'd be compliant, and then the cycle continues. As new systems are brought in, they're compliant, but as new configurations are laid on top of that, everything is all of a sudden non-compliant. So for our business unit audit case, or Cadence, so your audit commences, obviously, and hopefully they don't detect any audit violations, but sometimes it happens. So over the course of time, you're going to resolve those audit items. And usually the scope of an audit is a particular subset of systems. And the audit cadence is typically about 1 year. So we kind of go through this vicious cycle, but 30 different times over and over again throughout the year. So what happened is we bought chef licensing. And here's a couple things that we're working on. So first things first is you have to bootstrap everything. And with a very large node count, we had to take this step by step, environment by environment. So we would basically work with our business units and basically bring all of their systems into our chef infrastructure. From there, what we did is originally we had environments created around the domain boundary. But what we found out quickly is sometimes if you have a domain of hundreds, if not thousands of systems, you can't really roll or promote one cookbook to thousands of systems. It doesn't seem very safe. So what we would do is we would take these domain environments and chop those up into smaller environments. So what we would do is we'd work with the business unit to create like a staging or a fastering set of systems in their environment or in their domain, and we would create a chef environment around it. We promote code to that environment first, and then later on out to their production environment or the rest of the systems in that domain. So we'd rinse and repeat that for all the various domains at Jack Henry. From there, once you have everything bootstrapped, you start asking questions with InSpec. So write your profiles using InSpec and apply them to all systems. The great thing about that is all of that data is reported back into Chef Automate. Allows teams to write their own InSpec and contribute, so I can take a profile for a particular agent and hand it over to the group responsible for managing that agent. It's incredibly fast, even on Windows. If you're using anything past InSpec 1.49, I believe, they did some PowerShell improvements that make that go a lot faster. So with InSpec 2, we can run the CIS benchmark, which is 300 some odd controls, in about 60 seconds, and doing 300 plus tests in less than a minute. At Jack Henry, we bring in audit data every 6 to 9 hours. You can make this go faster if you'd like. That's just the cadence that works for us. And this allows us to collaborate with our local security professionals. So what you do is you basically, domain by domain, environment by environment, roll out all of your InSpec across your entire fleet. So you take all of the questions that you want to ask and just blast those out. And we're going to take a little advice from Oprah. So you get an InSpec profile, everybody gets an InSpec profile. We get pretty aggressive with our InSpec. It's pretty lightweight. A test can take a fraction of a second to execute, so that it's very, very non-impactful. So once we have InSpec, it goes out to the rest of the fleet at a relatively quick cadence. So some easy questions to ask. Have you patched recently? Are your required agents installed? Critical services running? Can you talk to your domain controller? Can you talk to other things in your environment that you should be able to talk to? Have you rebooted recently? That's more of a Windows thing. Are hardening measures in place? These are just some easy questions that we came up with. And in a Windows environment, if you blast this out, you will find variants. We found out lots of interesting stuff whenever we asked some of these very easy questions across our entire fleet. And then from there, you have a list of systems to go fix. A recent success story with InSpec. So what we did is we built a brand new system, hot off the press, had all the latest hardening measures in place. We basically blasted it out with all of the InSpec we could throw at it, which was about 275 total controls. What we did is we then took this system and joined it to one of our many domains. Soon after that, we all of a sudden discovered that we had 37 controls that were all of a sudden no longer in compliance. So what happened is we can see that when this system was built, we can see that it was fully compliant. We can see that it joined a domain. And then all of a sudden, we can see that all magically, mysteriously, 37 controls in that system are not compliant. So what this allowed us to do is to dig into it a little bit, and we found out that group policy in that particular Windows environment was conflicting with the standards that we had defined in our InSpec profile. So now, with this, we're actually working with group policy to make sure that Should group policy, the current settings be in place? Do we need to update InSpec? Do we need to update Chef? We're in the process of making those decisions and ironing out these 37 different issues that we came up with. Another success story, when you log into Chef Automate and look at the compliance tab, you should see a graph that looks similar to this. Blue is compliant nodes, orange is non-compliant nodes. You're going to see some variances and ebbs and flows. The system comes in, changes are made, profiles are changed. But one day, to my surprise, I logged in and saw something like this. If you see something like this, obviously this is a problem, okay? So what we did is we dug into this, and we have an agent on all of our systems that logs to a log file. And we just this was early on, we wrote an InSpec profile that checked, say, hey, this log file should be logged to every 24 hours, because if the agent is functioning, it logs to said file. Looked at this, and all of a sudden, that file was no longer being logged to. So what happened is we went ahead and notified the team responsible for that agent, and we got the problem resolved. The problem was that one of the repository that controlled all of these agents was misconfigured in some way. So this wasn't something that we could have fixed with Chef. This is something that Chef detected that is nothing, or this InSpec detected that Chef couldn't necessarily fix. So moving on to vulnerability remediation with Chef. So we're going to bring back some of our fleet. And step one is there's a new vulnerability that's discovered. Maybe it's WannaCry, maybe it's something with Qualys, et cetera, et cetera. Step two from there is you write your InSpec profile, and then you apply that to your entire fleet. So you scan everything, and you see which systems come to the top. From there, you write your Chef recipe and apply that to all the systems in your fleet. And if you still have any systems that are non-compliant, that probably means that you haven't bootstrapped it with Chef. So from there, just bootstrap it, and it's fixed. And then brush your shoulders off. So this is the same 6 or 7-step process that we have identified and that we can actually use for multiple use cases. So this is for a new vulnerability, but the same steps currently hold true if you have a new system configuration you want to apply. Or there's a new audit standard that you want to implement. Same 6 steps. You sit there and loop over them over and over and over again. So we're going to bring back our business unit audit cadence. This is what it looked like before, but now we have InSpec checking our audit items on a daily basis. And instead of the scope of an audit being a subset of systems, we can actually apply that InSpec logic to all of our systems. So now we have visibility into our data centers and know what our systems look like at any given time. So now the tool set looks like this. We have Chef for configuration management on Windows and Linux. And then for our compliance visibility, we have InSpec via Chef Automate. Data updated every 6 to 9 hours. You can make that go faster in your organization if you like. And as new controls are added, reporting updates automatically. So if person A adds a new control, immediately updated in Chef Automate. No additional work needed for that data to show up. So what this boils down to is we use InSpec as our eyes. So let's say that we want to ask a question of our infrastructure. We write that in InSpec and apply it everywhere. Then we determine what systems are affected and use Chef, or you can use another tool. But we use Chef mostly as our hands to go out and fix anything that we see fit. So over the past year, we've ran into a few things that we have learned. We've learned a lot. Be proactive. Know the results of an audit before it happens. I've been in several PCI audits, and usually you have the auditor saying, hey, can you open the SSHD config on the system? And they're going to poke around like, okay, you're using version 2, this thing should be on, this thing should be off. Or they're going to say, give me what is the permissions on Etsy Shadow. It should not be 777 like we all learned today. Take note of those things and turn them into InSpec, and then apply those to all the systems that matter. That way, the next time you have that particular audit, you're already going to know the answers. Strive for active compliance. Currently, we usually try to get away from point-in-time compliance audits. For a long time, we used to, as we would bring in new standards to our fleet, we would kind of do point-in-time snapshots and true up every year or so. Strive to get active and scan everything all the time with InSpec. Write InSpec for all the things that you care about, and nothing is too small for an InSpec test. If these critical services should be running, write an InSpec test form, even though you may not be enforcing that with Chef yet. If a certain file should be updated, if a certain package should be installed, if a certain registry key should be in place, write a test for that. This one we learned recently. Never use InSpec and scan in the same sentence. I know in the software it says InSpec or compliance scanner. What we've learned that a lot of people like to, they associate scan with something like antivirus or Qualys or something that's going to take a lot of CPU, take a lot of time that could potentially be impactful to the system. A Jack Henry scan is a 4-letter word. We try not to use that with InSpec. Recently, we were on a call with one of our business units, and we said InSpec scan. And they're like, OK, can you schedule that for 4 o'clock on a Sunday, and then we're going to do it again in 2 weeks? I'm like, no, that's not how it works. It's very lightweight. We're going to run this all the time. So try to decouple those two from the same sentence. InSpec is not bulk data collection. It is for yes or no questions only. We had some folks that said, oh, well, I want to see all of the running services on this system, or give me all of the contents of this folder, or give me everything under this registry key hive. Don't try to do that with InSpec. You'll have a bad time. InSpec is compliance, not bulk data collection. Collaborate with your resident security professionals. InSpec can be that common language between you and the various security teams in your organization. We've got a few folks that we're working with, and they're incredibly excited about using InSpec. They can take these long documents and turn them into code that compiles and executes against a remote system or systems. Stop clicking buttons, start writing code. Especially at scale, button clicking is never going to scale. What we try to do, if we're supposed to do it more than once, we're going to automate it in some way, shape, or form. So InSpec, Chef, those are 2 good tools to use. Learn to say no. You can't use Chef for all of the use cases. For example, if you're on Windows, probably Windows patching. If you do use Windows, or if you do use Chef for Windows patching, I'd love to have a conversation with you. But I've been told from many people don't use Chef for Windows patching. But if it doesn't feel comfortable, if it doesn't feel right to be using Chef for that use case, say no, or see if there's a different tool that can be used. Chef is not a project. You will never be done. As long as your organization is using Chef, you will be consistently finding new use cases. Things change. New OSs come out. Windows Server 2019 is around the corner. Ubuntu 18.04 just dropped. There's a new version of Red Hat probably coming out in the next year or so. You will never be done with using Chef. Get others involved. You cannot do it alone. Originally, at Jack Henry, it was started with like a small group of people saying, hey, we should use Chef. And what we did is we would bring some other people into the fray and be like, hey, look at all the things that we can do with Chef. And they would get excited. And they would talk to more people, and they would get excited. Until eventually, we bought Chef. So get others involved. You can't do it alone. Can't say that one enough. DevOps transformation is hard. We're only a year in, and we've just scratched the surface of the items that we would like to go after with Chef. For a while there, I was like, well, eventually I'm going to run out of stuff to do with Chef. That's not true. The backlog fills up much faster than I can actually get the cards out. And tell your story, and ask for other stories too. This is my 3rd ChefConf. My first year, I would walk up and say, hi, I'm Seth, how do you use Chef? Hi, I'm Seth, how do you use Chef? And I would learn from those people that I talked to about how they use Chef. Last year, we didn't have any nodes bootstrapped at all, and I would still ask people, how do you use Chef? How do you use Chef? And at that point in time, we knew that we were going to be ramping up the bringing in of Chef nodes, and it was an incredible task. I wasn't even sure where to start, but you can do it. And how you do that is you ask for other people's stories and see how they did it. And that's it. Does anybody have any questions? I went really fast. I apologize.
So we're kind of opposite from you. We mostly use Linux, but for our Windows workstations, our Windows servers, we have not had a lot of luck with reliable Chef conversions. Just the Chef client won't run for whatever reason. So what are you using to kind of assure that portion, basically the most important part of a Chef convergence where it actually runs is happening effectively? Do you have monitors in place to restart services, or are you using scheduled tasks? What's the method for that?
Excellent question. So we actually use the scheduled task method to make sure that our nodes on Windows check in on a regular cadence. We also are using Splunk So if, for example, we attempt to do a bootstrap of a system and it blows up and it never made that initial connection to the Chef server, that gets logged to the event log, and then Splunk will come around and pick up on that. So it's a combination of schedule task, keeping up with the missing nodes and the failed nodes inside of Chef Automate, and then keeping up with the Splunk dashboard that we've developed to detect any errors in the event log that are related to Chef.
Yeah, so in our environment, we're using Chef, and we go through like audits nonstop. And the biggest problem I have with the audits is the auditors want screenshots of the systems. Is any advice that you can give me to get them to believe like what's in Git and what's in Chef and what's reported in InSpec is accurate?
Excellent question. I've not ran into that particular having to convince an auditor to no, this is good. My advice to you would be to get them more comfortable with the product and to maybe prove to them that what is in InSpec matches that screenshot, where you can say, here, look at all of my nodes. Pick any of them and I will get you a screenshot. And basically get them comfortable with the product to make them feel comfortable that if InSpec says compliant, that it's compliant. But I've not actually ran into that particular use case just yet. Good luck, though.
You mentioned scanning all your nodes, and after you use Chef to fix them, if you still find one that's out of compliance, that probably hasn't been bootstrapped with Chef. So are you running scheduled scans in InSpec then, and how do you manage the list of nodes that you're scanning then?
Excellent question. So on the slide that said if you detect a node that isn't in Chef, usually that data from us comes from Qualys. Since Qualys or any other scanner is going to crawl your network, if you find something on that report from outside of Chef that says, hey, this isn't compliant, odds are it's not bootstrapped. So we've had a recent, with one of our business units, we did exactly that. They ran a Qualys scan, they say, here's the hundreds of nodes that are broken, and we would go ahead and fix those with Chef. A couple weeks later, they ran the same report, and there were 4 nodes on the list. So we're like, why aren't these fixed? Upon digging into it, they weren't bootstrapped.
So how do you handle any InSpec deviations with teams that don't want to follow the findings you have? I mean, you have an InSpec, you have a finding, a team deliberately deviates from what you're scanning. How do you handle that?
That's an excellent question. We're getting ready to approach that topic. For example, we have an InSpec profile that looks at S-channel configurations on Windows, and one of our environments is all red. Group policy is setting things to the way that they shouldn't be set, in our opinion. From what we're going to do with that group is we just have to sit down with them and say, hey, the best practice that we've come up with as a company looks like this, but your configurations look like this. Can we meet in the middle? Do we need to make an exception for your environment? Is there a reason these things look this way? At that point, just get in the room with them, be honest, be open, have a conversation with them, and get to the bottom of what you need to do as an organization to progress forward.
Do you use any of the profiles in Automate that come prepackaged, like the CIS ones, and do you wrap them with a wrapper around them, and how do you choose which controls to test against?
Excellent question. At this time, we do not. We kind of started with InSpec before we had access to any of the licensed Chef products, so we actually wrote our own CIS profile, and we're still actually using that. So we're not adhering to everything on those scans, because if you do, your system can't even be accessed anyways. You may as well unplug it. So we have a custom profile that we've written. That way, it kind of functions the way that we want it to. So unfortunately, not at this point. But I've heard that it's pretty easy to piggyback off of those profiles. I just haven't done it.
Hi. Do your security and compliance experts know how to code with InSpec, or how do you bridge the gap between the code and their expertise?
Good question. At this time, we're getting them comfortable with InSpec. We're not quite that far along yet where we have handed over all of the stuff that they're interested in. What we're doing is we're first getting all of the information that they want and saying, hey, look at this. Isn't this cool? And then we're working on giving them the repositories, giving them the pipelines that they need in order to make a change to that particular profile and promote it throughout the environments that they would be interested in. So not yet, but that is coming up very soon.
So how have you convinced your security team to switch from the Qualys to use InSpec?
Good question. So we're not planning on entirely replacing Qualys. What we're using Qualys for is we're using Qualys as an originator of vulnerabilities. So instead of taking Qualys and scanning all the systems, getting a list, what we'll do is we'll find a particular vulnerability that makes Qualys unhappy, write that in InSpec, and then use InSpec as the intermediate gap. That way, because we can deploy it quickly across the entire organization. So we're basically using InSpec to speed up what Qualys finds and not relying quite as heavily on Qualys to detect systems that may or may not be vulnerable. So basically we're using both, but we're using InSpec as that faster feedback loop.
You mentioned that you get your results via Chef Automate, is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, and is it possible to get those results as well via Splunk? Have you messed with that, or is Chef Automate sufficient enough for you guys?
We're pretty reliant on Chef Automate. We've not went down the route of perhaps laying down that InSpec on the disk and picking up with Splunk, so I can't really comment on that. But for the most part, we try to use Chef Automate and use the built-in tools as much as possible. We try not to get incredibly custom because that's more stuff that we'll have to maintain.
Hey Seth, so we are maybe 60-40 Windows to Linux, and we're going to use it on both sides. But with InSpec, when the bootstrapping and getting the client running, were you able to pull any other agents off? Because man, I don't know how many agents we keep adding to these boxes. Have you been able to eliminate the Qualys? I mean, we also have Tanium running for our security. I'd love to see some come off and try to do double duty with this stuff.
We've not run into the use case where we're ripping off anything from any agent off the system yet. We use Qualys mostly as like an external scanner, so we don't have the agent on all the nodes, at least not yet. But we're in the same boat. We have a lot of agents that get installed on all of our systems, and some of them are redundant. We just haven't got to the point where we can use Chef to like boot any of them out yet. So the question was, why use Chef Automate and not the open source versions of InSpec? Mostly because we have such a high node count. We almost had to purchase licensing, and we had other things that we wanted to do with licensing anyways. InSpec was kind of like icing on the cake, because we wanted to use Chef for a configuration management tool, and then the InSpec stuff was like, icing on the cake. So I'm not sure what it would look like to use InSpec without Automate. We'd have to set up we'd probably have to set up like an elk stack or something to grab all that information and aggregate it. But we had various other use cases outside of InSpec that prompted us to make the purchase.
Hi there, my name's Clinton Wolf. I'm actually one of the engineers that works on the InSpec project. So I wanted to say to the whole audience, you can answer the same question I'm about to ask to our speaker. What would you like to see coming up next in InSpec? And if anybody out here wants to talk to me about it afterwards, please do. But first I want to hear from the speaker.
Man, I was not prepared for that question. Really, there's not a ton that I've not been able to do with InSpec. So I don't really have an excellent question or an excellent answer for that. I don't really have to do anything custom with it. There's a bunch of resources built in. So kudos to anybody in here who are on the InSpec team. It's very feature complete. But I'll open that up to anyone else who wants to see something in InSpec.
Okay, so I have one question. I would like to see exception handling in InSpec, because sometimes we know that there is a compliance on our server, but we know that we should keep it. And I don't want to see it on the report that it's still like turning red. I want to just check it. It's agreed to have that compliance.
Hi. In Chef, we can use OHE file, OHE data. In InSpec, is there any option I can use OHE data to check some of the condition? For example, if my Windows version is this, skip this test. We are not able to perform that now in InSpec.
Excellent question. I believe with version 4.2 of the Audit Cookbook, there's a way where you can pass Chef attributes to InSpec. So you've got Chef attributes and InSpec attributes. I believe there's a version of the Audit Cookbook that makes them basically handshake. I've not played with that, so I don't know exactly how to do it, but from what I understand, I think that's possible. But unfortunately, don't have a great answer for you.
So let's touch base after this. I could help you with it. On the InSpec standpoint, one of the gentlemen out there asked a question around screenshots. That is something which I believe would be a great sort of value add. Like if it runs the report and you can see the screenshots of things which has at least failed. And on the same note, if I could export it as a PDF, that entire report, that would satisfy my audit folks.
It was really interesting to see how you're rolling this out to multiple business units. have you had more success with some business units than others when you come in with this new tool? And how have you convinced some of the people more reluctant to use tools like InSpec and Chef when you're coming in with it as a new product that they might have to learn?
Excellent question. At this point, we haven't brought in a lot of business units in the fray yet. There's still a lot of plumbing on our end that we need to do in order to hand that over. But how we would attack that, or how we're currently attacking that, is to basically get them comfortable with Chef. We have some business units that are like, hey, I want you to fix this problem, and I want you to use Chef to do it. So some are farther along in the process than the others. But what I would say is education. Talk to them about the product, tell them how it works, and then offer to assist. We offer trainings to any of our business units, and try to get them more involved as much as possible. And then kind of empower them on saying, hey, this is how you could fix this problem that you have in your environment. Or this is how we've fixed the problem in your environment using Chef. Basically get them comfortable with it and show them how awesome it is, really. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.